Okay, so we have 75 participants, which is fantastic. I think we had 120 so registered, so there's probably a few more to join as we progress, but it's already past 12:30 and I know you all have things to do after this. Everybody's busy. So welcome to our inaugural workshop, which we've titled Road Mapping for the Foundation Industries. It become apparent why it's called that as we move through. This is for the TFI Network Plus. Many of you may know who we are, but in case you don't, we are composed of 4 universities. This is the management committee, that is, University of Sheffield. So we have the University of Sheffield, which I am at, I'm the PI. We have University of Manchester, Swansea and Leeds. The management committee and the people involved at those universities are on the next slide. Can you forward, please? I'm not able to forward at the moment. Oh, maybe I am. Okay, so you got myself, Ian Rainey. I must admit that picture was taken a couple of years ago. Maybe I should upgrade that. I think I look a lot older now. Susan Bernal Lopez from Leeds University, whose specialism is cements. My specialism is ceramics and glass. William, who's from the University of Manchester, paper is his main thing. Cameron, he's our metals guru on the management committee, and he's from the University of Swansea. The IAP chair, the industrial or independent advisory panel chair, is Chris McDonald, and he's the CEO of the MPI. The people handling this in the background, to whom we have tremendous gratitude, Deborah, who is the marketing officer for the Network Plus, the TFI Network Plus, and Neil Lowry, who is the network manager. So what is the TFI Network Plus? TFI Network Plus, well, it's the Transforming Foundation Industries Network Plus. I think Ben will tell you more about the Transforming Foundation Industries concept in a brief introduction after my talk, my introductory slides here. We are charged with creating a network and hosting workshops and trying to move our agenda forward. Agenda is based around themes which are relevant to the Network Plus, energy efficiency, circular economy, supply chain resilience. Those are the themes that we've been charged with looking at. The network side of it is the workshops and the collaborative stuff that we do. The plus side of it is the fact that we have money for mini calls or mini projects, seed projects, call them what you will, as we move through, and we're expecting to issue a call for our first set of mini projects at the end of this month. So there's some cash available to do short-term 6-month projects to look at feasibility issues surrounding some of these themes. So what are we trying to do today? You've heard the title, the remit of which is road mapping essentially. We're not here to rewrite the sector roadmaps, the foundation industry sectors, glass, ceramics, and so forth, metals, cements, paper, chemicals. They have roadmaps, and they're good ones in general. What we're here to do is not to rewrite those, nor are we going to try and write a colossal foundation industry roadmap, which is overarching and describes everything. That is a little bit beyond our remit, although we can refer you to some roadmaps that partially go in that direction, such as the Spire Roadmap, which you can find a link for on our web pages. We're actually here today, with your help, to identify the synergies that exist between the sectors and perhaps some gaps that the current roadmaps don't address as well as they might. We'll be talking you through those as we discuss some of the themed challenges that I described in my previous slides. A strategy for the future, which involves those synergies and those gaps, is what we're trying to address. We would like to use the outputs of today to guide our future mini calls and also to perhaps gear the workshops towards that which is necessary for the foundation industries as a whole. So to really help shape as best we can how the Network Plus, the TFI Network Plus progresses. It would be fantastic if today some initial collaborations were begun between industries, between academics and industry, that will lead to some of those mini projects and proposals that we will ask you for in a very short future, very near future. We have 3 hours today in total. If as a group we think there needs to be more work on this, more discussions of some other aspects of road mapping that aren't going to be fleshed out in other workshops, then we can organize another event. We're at your disposal from that point of view. We're here to create collaboration and facilitate cooperation between academia, the foundation industries themselves, non-government organizations and so forth, so we can all work together and transform the foundation industries. The outputs from today will be collated eventually when we put everything together and we have time to digest it on our web page, which is tfinetworkplus.org. And you can find that quite readily. I've looked at it many, many times, and it comes up very quickly on a Google search. So why today's agenda? What is it we're trying to do today? With the design of the workshop fundamentally acknowledges the many excellent sector roadmaps that are produced and many of the previous contributions that have occurred in other events. We're not rewriting what has been done already. So that's the starting point. We've been looking at the roadmaps ourselves and trying to digest them, and we are going to kind of try and present some of the things that we believe are issues or strong synergies as we move through. So we're going to start up, and I'll show the agenda hopefully on the next slide. Okay, so we have, you see here's a truncated agenda, but just to talk through the purposes of each of these talks, Temi will give a high-level view of the strategies and issues regarding the foundation industries based on a very recent review and review document that she and her colleagues put together. Then we're going to have 10-minute presentations on 3 of the themes. Now, these aren't comprehensive technical presentations. They are suggestions, ideas, synergies, where the gaps are, a little bit provocative at times to get people talking and discussing. And we're going to discuss those themes and the important aspects of those themes within the breakout sessions that will follow each one. So it's a 10-minute talk and a 25-minute breakout session, and that's how we'll proceed. As I've said to you before, it's on the gaps and the synergies. That's where we're focusing our challenge today as the delegates at the workshop and as the organizers of the workshop. We will not in any great detail overview technologies. We'll talk about them in specific terms, a certain technology, but we won't talk about the technical aspects within that technology. There will be, as we progress through the network, focus workshops on different aspects of the themes and of the outcomes of this particular road mapping exercise, or gap and synergy exercise, if you will. The most important thing for today, in my view, as the PI, is the feedback from the foundation industry community. And that includes the researchers and the universities who work alongside the foundation industries, as much as the foundation industry members themselves, industrial members. This is a community we're trying to establish, and we're trying to get collaboration between those things. So the feedback from everybody out there will shape how we run the TFI Network Plus. And hopefully by the end of it, you'll have a web page which acts as a repository for mini project outcomes, workshop outcomes that can guide your thought processes as you move through and push towards ultimately net zero carbon in 2050. Just to show you a brief truncated agenda, after me is going to be Ben, Temi will speak, and then we have the breakout sessions, the first on energy efficiency, led by myself and Cameron, another one on resource efficiency by Susan. John Wilmot will give us an overview of digitalization. Breakout sessions will follow, and then there's a brief wrap up at the end. And we hope to be through by around 3:30. I don't want to keep you any longer than that. Okay, that's my introduction over. You'll see me again later on as we discuss the energy efficiency part and also in the breakout sessions. I will now hand over to the Deputy Director of the Transforming Foundation Industries concept, Ben Walsh.
So I hope so. So thank you, Ian, and thank you everyone for taking your time this very sunny afternoon to come and talk to us about transforming foundation industries. I will keep this really short because I think most of you know who we are and what we're about, but I think it is really important, you know, to recognise just how important what we're doing here is today. So, oh, it does work. We can read through the slide. So, as we know, foundation industry is combined of 6 sectors, and the fundamental truth is that these are not nice to have materials that they're producing. These are absolutely core to all civilizations' way of life. So they are hugely important to society, both into the high value manufacturing and in particular the construction sectors. And without them, just look around you, you can't walk a meter without touching one of these outputs of one of these sectors. Unfortunately, the inalienable fact is that they're also the largest industrial polluter. And so that isn't conducive to a long-term sustainable society. So we've got these 2 opposing problems. One is that they're vital to life as we know it, and the second is that they could end life as we know it because they're generating so much carbon dioxide. And that's really where the challenge is about. Is how do we ensure that these sectors remain competitive globally, that they are an important part of the industrial landscape, but they produce these products in a way that is sustainable. And when we talk about sustainable, we're talking about the triple bottom line is important in terms of both the value add in terms of people, but clearly also in terms of the amount of industrial pollutions, in particular carbon dioxide, that are produced. And that's really the philosophy behind the challenge. How do we change this large sector to become much more sustainable and future-proof it for the next 2 millennia, like it's been for the last 2? So the challenge itself is £66 million of UK taxpayers' money. So that's yours and mine. So we need to make sure we spend that wisely. That has been committed with a spend from industry of an additional £83 million. Overall, we have 5 work streams. The first one is looking to develop a pilot scale facility for the glass sector. So that's help scale up glass from relatively small scale to something which is industrially meaningful. The largest part of our program is a collaborative research and development, so that's industry-led innovation, and that is to solve a whole range of challenges, cross-sectoral challenges facing the industry, 3 of which Ian outlined initially. We have an academic research hub that will be imminently announced, focused on technology transfer of high quality UK-based research into an industrial setting. I'll talk about the 4 million in a second. And there's a £22 million partnership with the private equity firms, and that really is to encourage fast-moving, high-value startups into this space where there's really quite a big problem around the fact that these sectors are slow growth and low margin, and that makes it very, very hard for investors to invest in this over the timescales needed to realise them. If you're a digital tech, you're either a billionaire or you're broke in a month, whereas it'll take years to determine whether that's the case within these sectors. The £4 million is really where the Network Plus sits, and the Network Plus it's an unusual work topic, this one. So the rest are pretty much business as usual for UKRI. It's about giving money out and convening and helping organisations innovate. What we're doing here is we're around trying that transformational piece. It's around turning what is a series of projects into a programme so that we ultimately leave the place better than just a series of individual discrete projects. And that's around building the academic base, which is what the Network Plus is there. That's around ensuring that industry understand how to innovate. There's a lot of companies that don't innovate in this space, and it's about how we gather and help them. It's about supporting the sectors more broadly, so that what they do is that they can go out and help their members and help government understand their needs. And finally, it's around seeing the UK and UK foundation industries on a global landscape as well. So it's quite an important and complex landscape. We're changing hearts and minds within that £4 million to support the academics. And this is what this is part of. This Network Plus is absolutely key to that. It's that glue which will really start to pull together some of what appears to be bigger parts. So that's really all I want to say here, is that this is a really important part of the challenge, and that the outputs, both in terms of academic outputs, but also in terms of the skills that develop from the researchers involved, will be absolutely key in meeting the challenges of the sector over the coming decades. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ben. That was a terrific introduction. And you can see how the Network Plus fits into the overall scheme of things as far as the foundation industries are concerned. Next, we have Temi, who's kindly agreed to give us a talk on innovation readiness in the foundation industries. This is based on a recent report, fresh or hot off the press. I don't think we even use those phrases anymore, but she will give us an overview of what her and her colleagues have been doing over the last couple of years.
So thank you for this opportunity to actually present some of our findings from a research we conducted last year. It was during the pandemic, and it was we did that between February and November last year. This is a research we did last year during the pandemic. We didn't know we were going to have the pandemic, then that happened, but we still had to go ahead with the research anyways. This was sponsored, but the project was undertaken on behalf of the UKRI. And we practically were, the objectives were basically to look into how innovation ready the foundation, UK foundation industry sectors were or are, more or less. So what did we do? This is an overview of what I'll be talking about. So briefly, I would look at what the UK foundation industries, how businesses, how they run their business. Also looking at innovation activities in the sectors, a brief look at collaboration, and then a brief talk also on energy resource efficiency, and then the impact of COVID-19, bearing in mind that this was conducted during the pandemic and when we had lockdown restrictions. And then just a look at the way forward and what the next steps should look like. Debbie, can I go on to the next slide, please? Thank you. Okay, I might have to skip this slide because I don't want to dwell too much on it, but yeah, it's just giving us an overview of what the foundation industry really is. So we have over 7,000 businesses in this sector, and they contribute over 6 million to in turnover, overall turnover to the UK economy. The foundation industry foundation industry plays a key role in the manufacturing supply chain in the UK. So we all know that. So these are industries that we really, really need to focus on, because at the end of the day, when it comes to importation and exportation, these industry sectors play a key role in that regard. Next slide, please, Debbie. Thank you. So going straight to what we did, we looked at how the industry, the foundation industry businesses were actually how they run their business. Our data and methods basically was, we made use of both primary and secondary data sources. So we did conduct some interviews, and we then also conducted a survey. We also did some comparative analysis, looking at some other secondary data from LSBS and ONS, and just checking that what we were also, what we had from our findings. We also did some literature review at the onset of the study. So what were we able to see with regards to the foundation industry? First of all, we do know that the foundation industry, in the foundation industry, we have long investment cycles, very long investment cycles. And from the survey, we did find out that many of the firms there actually had very short planning horizons. So basically you would have businesses planning with, the planning period was within 1 to 5 years, majorly for many of the businesses in these industry sectors. Also, that also went down onto capital expenditure and R&D planning and R&D investment, as well as training investment. So basically businesses were more or less planning for the short term. And this we noticed majorly for SMEs. For bigger firms, larger firms, this tended to be much more, the planning horizon was much more longer for bigger businesses. Also, we asked questions with regards to business plans and how many of these businesses actually took their time to write a business plan. Approximately half of foundation industry businesses, specifically we had, I think 54% of businesses had a written business plan, which was reviewed annually. And more than 37% of businesses in the sector did not actually have a written business plan. As would be expected, the large firms, the larger ones, were much more likely to have a written business plan that was actually reviewed annually. So we would say planning in the FI sectors was more or less, we do know it's short-term planning horizons, and also the use of business plans was not necessarily regarded as something that was of great importance. Then we also asked questions regards to the competitive advantage, what really was, what were the factors contributing to their having competitive, like a competitive advantage. So asking the firms, what would be the factor that you would view as giving you the edge over other businesses? And the most reported factors were basically quality, customer service, and delivery terms. And we had about 89% of firms saying, oh, quality was what gave them the added edge. 86% customer service, and 58% of businesses regarded price as a competitive strength. But less than half of the firms we spoke to actually regarded their environmental performance as a competitive advantage. So we would wonder if that questions what how FI businesses, foundation industry businesses, view environmental performance, especially now where there is the net zero challenge. 2050, the target, 2050 target is fast approaching. So if that is not necessarily a key factor, then we can then question what exactly the foundation, the constraints are in that regard. Also, we also looked at challenges in the industry sectors. So based on our interviews and the surveys, we really wanted to know what the business concerns were in these industry sectors. And our findings showed that for many of the businesses in these industry sectors, it was majorly international competition, increased international competition, high energy costs, also a high level of anxiety over the impact of Brexit. So concerns about Brexit, the uncertainty, how businesses would progress or proceed after Brexit. Those were the key issues that actually bothered many businesses in these industry sectors. Also, we also had issues with regulatory requirements and pressures to reduce emissions. Those were also factors that were actually lingering in the minds of many of these industry business owners. So we had regulatory requirements, pressures due to carbon emission targets, and also the environmental impacts. Debbie, please. Thank you. Okay, so we did do a comparative study. So like I said earlier, we did some literature review, and then we looked at some various, we looked at data from LSBS 2019, and we also looked at this OECD report. And then we tried, this data is from after the financial crisis up until 2017, by the way. And then we looked at how the UK was positioned with regards to R&D intensity, comparing the UK with its other counterparts. And what we saw was that generally, the UK, compared to its counterparts, is not necessarily positioned where we want it to be. The table here does show the data that covers total business investment across the whole economy in manufacturing and selected foundation industry subsectors. So if you look at the data, we have general manufacturing, then we have these other foundation industry sectors. Non-metallic minerals actually include cement, concrete, and ceramics. So it's all lumped in there. What we can see here is overall, R&D intensity in foundation industries is actually lower than that of manufacturing in general in the selected, in developed economies. And it seems the chemical subsector seems to be the forerunner here, investing in R&D at a higher share of gross value added in the majority of countries. We can say there's a literature we also looked at, I think it was Lawrence and Sterling 2016. And they did say that the UK's foundation industries has kind of shrunk by 43% compared with an average decline across the OECD of 21%. So where across the OECD would be 21%, the UK's foundation industry kind of has shrunk at 43%. So that means we now have one of the smallest foundation industry sectors relative to GDP in the OECD. So what are we saying? We are saying innovation intensity in the UK's foundation industries is generally lower than that in key competitor countries. Debbie, please. Thank you. So going on just to look at innovation activities in the last 3 years. So we asked questions, have you innovated? What innovation activity did you conduct in the last 3 years? So up until March, I think, yeah. Up until May, because we collected the survey of May. And some respondents indicated that they were actively involved in both product and process innovation. Many indicated that they were either process or product innovators. So they were either doing one or the other, and some did say they were doing both. In the 3-year period, looking at the graph here, 56% of foundation industry businesses had innovated to develop new or improved products or services, and 53% had done that for processes. Looking at what we observed in the LSBS data for 2019, our survey does show that innovation activity in the foundation industry tends to increase with business size. So the larger the firm, the more innovation is anticipated. For smaller firms, I mean firms with less than £1 million turnover, we had less than 38% of such businesses actually reported product or service innovation in the past 3 years, compared with 71% of businesses with a turnover of over £15 million. Our survey shows the foundation industry businesses are more likely to engage in both products and process innovation. So they would do both or either one, either of the two. What else did we see here? Also, we saw that 41% of businesses compared with just under 32% of businesses. So over a quarter of businesses in our samples actually reported no innovation activity. So looking at this, we have 32% doing both products, doing product or process, and then 41% doing both kinds of innovation. 25 and 26% not doing any, neither product, neither process. Debbie, please. Thank you. And then we also looked at these trend by sector. There are also differences in this regard, regards to looking at subsectors. It seems like businesses in the chemical sector were more likely, or most likely, to report new or improved products or service innovation. So looking at what we have here, 68% of firms or businesses in the chemical sector actually reported product innovation. Whereas just under than half of cement and ceramics businesses introduced new product innovation. So we are talking 49% and 48% respectively. So what are we saying? When it comes to product innovation, okay, I'll try. I'll round up and I'll probably skip some slides. Okay. So when we're talking about innovation, basically, it seems like there's more emphasis on products. When we look at sectoral differences, the chemical sector is the forerunner when it comes to product innovation. But when it comes to process innovation, the variation is not so apparent across the sectors. Debbie, please. Thank you. Also, we asked what kind of innovation these firms were engaging in. Just over half of new or improved product, just over half of the firms did say they were engaging in new or improved products, new products to the market, where we have more than 2/3 of these firms engaging in process innovation that was new to the business, not new to the market. Generally, across all subsectors, there's a trend towards more businesses engaging in process innovation rather than product innovation. Debbie, please, next slide. So I can rush through this. Okay, so this is just showing the different reasons for motivations for innovation. So basically the drivers. But because of time, I'm just going to ask you to take a look at the last factor there, which is reducing energy use. Here we have just less than 5% of firms actually saying that was a driver or that was a motivation for innovation. And that's kind of surprising because with all the emphasis on resource efficiency, net zero targets in 2050, we would expect that that would be one of the key factors or key drivers of innovation. Next slide, please. Thanks. Here we also asked, yes, reduced environmental impact is also the, yeah. Also, we also looked at the ambitions of some of these businesses because obviously is also linked to innovation. So if you want to grow your business, then there's a tendency that you will go ahead and innovate. Businesses that actually declared that declared an ambition to increase future sales, we're more likely by over 2 to 1 to have engaged in a combination of product and process innovation. So ambition is definitely linked to innovation, and that's what we can see even in the foundation industry sectors. Next slide, please, Debbie. Thank you. So going on to resource efficiency here, across the foundation industries, half of businesses invested in new technologies to improve energy and resource efficiency over the last 3 years. So that's what our findings show. But sectoral comparison, that's not even showing here, does suggest that the paper sector had the highest percentage of businesses investing in such technologies. Also, across the sector, you would notice that large businesses were more likely to commit investments in that direction as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Now, we then asked these firms just to recognize, just to know if it was more or less, it had to not, the lack of investment had to do with financial constraints, or because they had exhausted all existing technologies in making sure that they were actually efficient in the use of their energy sources. But what we found was that a large majority, about 90% of the businesses we surveyed, reported that they had made all investment possible in energy efficiency with the funds they had available. So it was more to do with funding. And there was little variation across the different business sizes. So looking at large, medium, and small, and micro, it was the responses kind of resonated down the line. Also, we asked regards to limits of existing technologies as a constraint, but we had mixed views in this regard because across the whole sample, just about 41% of the firms we spoke to actually agreed that it had to do with not having the technology to actually make these savings possible, and only 54% disagreed. Also, regards to proving technology, about 30% of firms agreed that there was technology that they could use. So a majority of the firms actually believed that they didn't have the required technology for these energy savings, about 60%. Okay, next slide, please. Let me skip this one. Next slide, Debbie. Okay, so going straight to what's involved. So we know that the foundation industry sector, they do have their challenges when it comes to innovation, but how can we pull through? How can we go ahead? What's involved in all of this? How can we then get these businesses moving when it comes to innovation? The first would be looking at collaboration. There is very minimal collaboration in these industry sectors due to commercial sensitivities, lack of trust, and a lot of sometimes not even having the knowledge, not knowing where these technologies or where this information regards to innovation can be, where this information can be sourced. We also realized that many foundation industry businesses are actually making use of available supports with regards to external advice from agencies, government innovation agencies, even from universities and other R&D institutes. Trade associations also were pinpointed as the findings here. We actually had mixed findings here. Some believed they were actually they were enabling innovation, and some businesses didn't even believe that was the case. And some actually felt that businesses, that trade associations, some weren't even members of trade associations at all. Many businesses also felt that they weren't able, they weren't able to access finance for innovation. That was also a challenge for for them, but some that actually did go ahead to apply for these supports actually were able to get this finance help. 84% of those that actually applied for finance actually were able to go ahead. That starts, I think 84% of those that received some or all of this, so 85% of those that applied actually received what they actually applied for. So the finance is actually there, but many businesses don't actually go after them because of the, according to them, bureaucracy and some of the challenges when it comes to filling out these application forms. Next slide, please. Thank you. I think I'll skip this one next so that I can just finish. So I tried to put together a summary of the innovation constraints. I'm not going to dwell on this, but we do know that due to high capital investments, we know that there are entry barriers when it comes to getting into the foundation industry, especially for small businesses. And then lack of competition in the industry sectors. There was a mention, many of the firms said, yeah, there's a lack of management and leadership skills in these industry sectors. So I think there's a gap in the industry regards to getting CEOs, getting managers trained in trained and having the capability to manage some of these businesses, to develop the kind of ambition and mindsets for innovation so that they can advance these businesses forward. So that feeds onto the resistance to mindset. Some businesses are basically not just about innovation, because if it's not broken, why are we mending it? So someone actually said that to us whilst we were collecting our data. And also regards to commercial sensitivities, widespread reluctance to collaborate. So that's another constraint. And then also when it comes to regulatory pressures due to carbon emissions, many businesses already operating within very tight, slim profit margins can't even begin to imagine taking out some of those funds, some of that fund, whatever it is, to actually invest in energy resource efficient processes. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is still talking about management and leadership. Debbie, please, can you go to the next one? Okay, so we did ask about the impact of COVID, the impact of COVID. So many of the firms we spoke to said it did, there was a drastic drop in turnover and employment. Many actually that would predicted lower forecasts with regards to growth, even across all the businesses, not just small businesses. Also lower budgets with regards to training, but let's remember that this was during the first lockdown. So I guess some of these businesses are picking up already, and they're I think the predictions are not as bad as we actually all thought it would be. Next slide, which should be the last, I think. Yes. Okay, so this is my last slide. It's just to give us some reflection and what we should be thinking about. Some of these are basically linked to policies that might help the foundation industry sectors. We already spoke about collaboration. It's key. Many of these businesses are SMEs. They cannot afford to take out any more, to squeeze out that funding for innovation, but they can do better if they're collaborating with other businesses, or other businesses have actually invented the wheel already. We also talked about developing management and leadership skills. That's another way to go about it, because it starts, a lot of it starts in the mind. If you have a mindset for growth, then you put in the work to make it happen. Also empowering some of these trade associations, they can play a key role in enabling innovation, acting as an innovation broker in that regard. Also fostering collaboration with R&D institutes. What we are doing now, what we're doing here now, it's part of it, collaborating with research institutes and what the TFI network is putting together. That's also the way to go. I will stop here so that, because I know I've already taken too much time.
Thank you, Temi. It's a comprehensive survey and that Temi and her team have carried out. I think if you want to ask questions of Temi in the chat room, that would be perfectly acceptable. I think we better quickly move on because we don't want to go over too much on the time. Move to the next topic, which is our pre-talk for the first breakout session, which is going to be on energy efficiency. This is going to be led by myself and Cameron, and we'll be tag teaming this. So we'll move ahead and we'll try to just promote discussion. It's not comprehensive. It's just about synergies and gaps, as you will see. So do you want to go ahead? I'll advance for you.
Please, yeah, you can. I'll be your Chris Whitty. Next slide, please. Thanks very much, everybody, for joining. I did want to go into some of these things in a little bit more detail, but I think found ourselves in a position where we really want to make as much time as possible for the wider community attending the workshop to engage as possible. So I'm going to talk less than I was, but essentially the point here initially is, well, let's just look at what the big picture is. So we have around about 50% of the total energy consumption and around heat, and that represents about 2/3 of the industrial demand when you break it down. There's a little bit more of a breakdown in this slide over here, which I was going to talk through in a little bit more detail. But suffice to say that doesn't necessarily agree with what we have here, but you have to add the chemical energies on to extract the heat energies. The other point here is that when Ian comes on to discuss the synergies and gaps in the roadmaps from an energy perspective, we noticed that there was a heavy reliance in electrification. So if you look at that, well, about a quarter of that is renewable at the moment. And whilst the vast majority of investment that goes into the change in the energy supply is in renewables, we're still investing in fossil fuels. So the idea that we'll be able to offload a lot of our challenges in decarbonisation onto electrification is, especially in the medium term, is difficult. So next slide, please. The next thing that we wanted to do was just draw attention to the input that's already been made as part of the, I think, very successful engagement practices of the wider Industrial Strategy Challenge Fund group, Innovate UK, and also with the KTN. So they've run a series of workshops around these themes, which have helped us to build up the high level picture. Ian, if you could just click through these, I think there's a few animations which I'll have to skip. But essentially, you can pick out areas around energy that have high levels of opportunity, high levels of impact, and relatively short timescale. So that indicated at this very early stage back in April 2019 that there were opportunities to prioritize energy from a sort of low-hanging fruit perspective. Ian, if you just click on. And then that progressed. So later in 2019, there were some focus groups that were run out of Sheffield University, again in partnership with Innovate UK and the KTN. And they produced these quite helpful heat maps. These are available online, and we can definitely point you towards these from the Network Plus. But one of the things about this was interesting is that just picking out a couple of things, I know it's difficult to see, but there's some agreement here between the improvements in energy reduction and the embodied energy materials and disruptive processes, but less than what we saw in the reliance on, say, more conventional approaches like heat recovery and especially CCU and CCS. So what that really said, and that actually then led to a series of work that went on between the cross-sectoral industrial groups where they prioritized a series of projects. And there's just a list out here, but if you look at the ones that hit the top, again, they were kind of related to a lot to energy. So heat recovery, combustion technologies, the top three, and then one in the industrial symbiosis and reuse of waste. And I picked up the comment from Mark Jolly, which I think is useful. Perhaps we should stop calling it waste altogether. So I guess the point is that's given us a good, strong platform from a high level, from a generic perspective. But the question is, and what we want to try and challenge you to do is to say, well, what does that actually drill down to and mean in terms of technologies? And hopefully we'll be able to inspire you to be able to do that with some of the points that Ian will draw together from the roadmaps now. Ian, over to you.
Thank you very much. So thanks for that. We all know some of the issues. At the moment, if we want to electrify everything, then it's expensive in comparison with gas. Ceramics in the glass industry still use essentially gas-powered furnaces. There are some electric ones, but that is the mainstay. And it's 1/3 cheaper, more or less, to use gas. Can this be alleviated? Who knows? Okay, but that's one of the synergies that exist in moving towards advanced and large-scale electrification has still some issues. That's very clear. Hybrid energy solutions are mentioned repeatedly, perhaps combinations initially of some kind of electric kind of heating, microwave is been touted as a possibility, perhaps to preheat ceramics, glass, even metals prior to the use of any kind of fossil fuels. Carbon capture, storage, utilization is a synergy across many of the roadmaps, in the energy intensive sectors particularly. Unfortunately, it is actually funding wise outside of the remit of the TFI, but we can point you in the direction of our local carbon capture storage network plus the UKCC SRC, which actually sits at Sheffield. I'm on the board on that, and I can make connections for people interested in exploring those areas. Heat recovery, those kind of technologies do exist. There's always competition between heat recovery and the exhaust from the exhaust with emissions. That is a problem that gets talked about extensively in the roadmaps. But there are heat recovery systems that are available that you can ask for feasibility studies for from companies. There's a couple of companies out there, I won't mention them, but you probably know some of them themselves, and that is an issue. CapEx spending is an issue with those kind of things, and the fact that some of the players in this are multinational companies, so tapping into government-based de-risking money is more problematic from that point of view. And feasibility studies are required. Hydrogen, biomass, general fuel switching, again, this is outside of our scope, but we're happy to point and discuss and push people towards academics who are of interest in this area. Biomass in general is not considered as sufficient to be a long-term replacement for any other type of fuel, simply because its abundance is not large enough. Perhaps hybrid with other electrified resources, such as the microwave we're talking about. Thermoelectrics appear quite often as a potential thing, but they're largely untested as to what you get back out of them. I think we need some serious feasibility studies on this, and be aware that thermoelectrics require a temperature gradient. So that's one of the things you need to create. There is persistent and consistent mention, particularly in executive summaries, of low carbon technologies without really defining what they are. I find this a synergy and a frustrating one. As an academic, I would always dislike dangling statements, which tend to be there sometimes, I think, to impress the politicians rather than to actually tell us how to move forward. So, oh, sorry, my fault. I was going the wrong direction. Schoolboy error. There are successes. It's not all doom and gloom. The ceramic sector is decreasing. The use of biome is decreasing its energy consumption. The cements sector is using more biomass. So there are positives. You could quote equally positive aspects for the metal sector, the energy intensive sectors, and other sectors as well. So there is real positives here, but we're trying to kind of come up with a strategy that we can build our network plus around. Gaps. Okay, so gaps. This is really interesting. As we looked through the roadmaps, we found that many were quite limited in scope and didn't often take into account mining and extraction as part of the energy efficient processes that you need to consider. So that was a gap. So we were kind of worrying about it once the raw materials had arrived on our shores. That was one of the things that was apparent in several of the roadmaps. And perhaps that is something we should consider. Supply chain integration in embodied energy. We often considered embodied energy as lightweighting, fuel efficiency for planes and so on. But there is less material when you lightweight it. And if you lightweight with a low cost material, you can have less embodied energy. So we maybe need to revisit some of the decades old type of approaches for reducing the amount of materials we use to make products. clusters sharing energy or energy symbiosis, the idea of putting sectors together where perhaps hot air generated in abundance by one sector can be used by another sector, co-located. That kind of approach is of interest, I think, and is a bit of a gap. It's not really discussed in great detail. Digitalization, online monitoring is something that we really need to consider. Do you want to have any comments so far, or shall I just move on, Cam?
No, I mean, just in terms of the digitalization and monitoring, one of the things that we need to consider this is in the context of how we use the materials as well, and the role that some of the foundation industry sectors, through their expertise and knowledge of the materials that they're producing, might have in extending the life of those materials, and still do that in a way that continues to make them profitable, so that it's in their interest actually that people use less material, and that's still something that delivers value as organizations. I think that, and digital technologies can play a key role in that.
Thanks, Cam. Oh, I lost control. And so let me just go back. I'm going all over the place here. I think, again, the gaps and absence of a declaration of those low carbon technologies often there. It's quite high level, microwaves, cold sintering, these kind of ideas that have been bounced around. Are these the technologies that we should be pursuing? Do we need to chase disruptive technologies? The cost effectiveness of heat recovery systems, thermoelectrics, heat exchange systems, we haven't really delved into that. So perhaps techno-economic analysis, life cycle assessment needs to play. Particularly techno-economic analysis can give you an ability to do a feasibility study. And one specific thing that was brought up, which I thought I quite liked because of the glass side of things, is that we take a long time with glass melting to wait for the bubbles to disappear. We usually decrease the viscosity to make that happen, which is at a higher temperature, some additive, but perhaps there are other techniques that we could use, ultrasound, to encourage bubbles to disappear from our melts, which I thought was very interesting as a specific mention. So I guess granularity is the thing I'm trying to get to, is what is it that we can do, what can we test in terms of feasibility studies within the Network Plus, what things can we actually do as part of a granular strategy in the Network Plus to promote some of these gaps and these synergies that we have in these sectors, the sector roadmaps. How do we collate all of this? I think we'd like to collate it something like this, where we can list the technologies, the maturities in terms of the readiness level, technology readiness levels, I can't say that word, and then we can map out where we are with it. There's several columns here that you can see: policy intensive, UK investment. Should we add other columns such as R&D, strength in the UK? What other things should we add to these columns? And we can maybe use this on our web page to collate what we get out of today. And I think that would be a nice way forward. So I would like to conclude on that. And if everybody's okay, move to the breakout session, where we are going to discuss perhaps some of these controversial things that I've mentioned. So thank you. Okay, so we should all be back in the main session. Thank you for everybody. My general comment is, and it was raised, and I should have raised this myself, is that please use the chat function at all times to raise points and comments, and that would maximize our input. Please also contact the management committee as well if you want to follow anything up. Our emails are available, and you can always contact the TFI general email, and that can be spread out to us on a personal basis if required. We're now going to move on to talk on industrial symbiosis, effectively resource recovery and foundation industries, opportunities, challenges. And it's going to be given by Susan and Bill. And again, the idea is to prompt a discussion in the breakout session. And there's been plenty of discussion. That's fantastic. And if you please enhance it with the chat, that would also be great as we move through. So over to Bill and Susan. I do not know which way around you're going to do this, so it's over to you guys.
Yeah, great. It's Bill and Susan. I'm starting off, so thank you, Ian, and good afternoon, everybody. So yes, we're going to do a double header, talking a bit more about resource and materials in the system. So let's see if I can move on to the next slide. Yeah, that worked. Good. So rather a different place when we look at resources and utilization, and we'll head towards symbiosis. In the roadmaps that we were looking at are overwhelmingly concentrating on energy, on decarbonisation, on net zero, just as Ian and Cam led into the previous discussion that we've just had. At least that's the case for the UK roadmaps. The roadmaps we found from the EU, from the now remind me, Institute of Minerals, Industrial Minerals Association, the Confederation of European Paper Industries, for example, do provide a bit more of a materials focus. Ian mentioned in his introductory remarks the Spire roadmap, and this really does capture something that looks like the foundation industries. Now there's actually two documents here. There's one from a few years ago, and there's a working document that's just been published and is live and receiving feedback, which pulls in also the ceramics and pulp and paper industries properly into the Spire portfolio. Now, this roadmap, the Spire document, does indeed link the optimization of energy and material resources as very much part of the same story. And I don't know about your the breakout rooms you were all in. Actually, one we just had in group 3 actually came to this point naturally through the discussion that we need to be talking about the same materials and resources very much as part of the same story. On the slide, I draw attention to Policy Connect, a cross-party body of MPs who produced a report with a title that looked fascinating, that there was no time to waste for resources recovery and the road to net zero, and really it didn't go very much further than energy from waste. And so I think we really need to make sure that we're looking further than energy from waste, although of course it will be part of the story. The Spire document does look at valorization of waste in the context pretty much of the sector that generates it, but not much on symbiosis, particularly not much on the symbiosis, not just among the foundation industry sectors, but we may actually reach to sectors beyond the foundation industries when we start to put value into our waste. Touching back on Temi's point, then this report does actually emphasise the cost barriers to innovation and the opportunity for cross-sector collaboration, which of course is key to what we're trying to establish in the Network Plus. I'm going to run very briefly through what's on the right-hand side of this. I think the key thing actually is in the top, where it talks about using energy and resources more efficiently, but the key one is to reduce. And this is the key: reduce the energy, reduce the resources that we're using to get to the same place, even if it's by I forget. But so to reduce is key. Oh, lightweighting is what I was looking at. So I'm going to move on now, and the next slide sits with Susan.
Thank you, Bill. So previous slide, please. Can you go back to the previous slide? Yes, thank you very much. So as Bill was highlighted, when we had a look to all the different roadmaps, one of the main things that came up is that there is not explicitly say, or there is not a component between these roadmaps related to resource efficiency or recovery. And there is not an explicit like roadmap on enabler for different or cross-sectoral industries to actually collaborate in these regards. So one of the striking things is that there is little or no information in our existing roadmaps about alternative feedstocks, which kinds of limit the potential utilization of different, well, we call it waste, but we have seen in the chat quite a lot of conversation that we should call it byproduct, side streams, and so on. But these roadmaps from foundation industries do not consider these alternative feedstocks. And when we think about this ethos of resilient nation, so self-sufficient nation, but and kind of a little bit contradictory that we don't think about it. How can we make our foundation industries more self-sufficient? So yes, there are some mentions in the roadmaps about recycling, but it's very important to consider that recycling is not circularity. It's pretty much a part of the linear economy where all our foundation industries at the moment operate. So also, most of the roadmaps that we have identified are also from cradle to gate. So it's pretty much focused on the production of an individual product or process, but it's not looking at how this product or process will operate within the life cycle in the society. So as I mentioned, all these lines up with a linear economy where only economy matters. I think there is a growing interest in talking about recycling, also revisiting the amount of resources that we're consuming at the moment. Do we need to, or can we somehow fulfill the demands of different consumers and society using the minimum amount of resources possible? So that's quite important. But we heading towards the right steps, I will say, in the UK in recent years. Actually, last year, the government and UKRI did a significant investment creating 5 different interdisciplinary circular economy centers, which will open a lot of opportunities, I will say, for all of us and for all different sectors to learn first what circular economy actually means and how circular economy principles can actually be implemented across foundation industries. So this is very important. And well, typically when we talk about industries, we think about profit, but what is really interesting to see is that one of the incentives of circular economy is identifying these unique opportunities, not just to tackle environmental challenges, but also find like economically suitable solutions that will benefit the long-term sustainability of these sectors. So for example, perhaps we can identify low-cost feedstocks that would enable us to preserve the quality of the products that we want to produce. Also, we might have some environmental savings that could be identified there, and also some financial savings. And in my opinion, also, it's very important to consider that landfill and incinerating of waste should be minimized or completely avoided. So we really need to change our mindset and hopefully go at some point in the future to the life models, which is the final ambition to keep like a justice between the environment and the society. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is just a brief overview of some of the guidelines that we have at the moment regarding a resource recovery from waste. So I took this title actually from a very good and very interesting project and some colleagues of mine run at the University of Leeds. So I invite you actually to have a look to the blogs and the discussions from that initiative, very interesting. So the first one is this document from the government that was developed in 2018, Our Waste, Our Resources, a strategy for England. What is really striking about this document in particular is that it focused mostly on food waste and plastics. It touched lightly on foundation industries, but the only mention is actually the paragraph at the bottom of this slide where it talks about recycling. Again, recycling is not circular economy. Potentially bringing materials to market, new materials to market and services, and of course, the importance of trialing and researching processes and technologies that will enable the use of different ways of byproducts. So with the creation of these new centers for circular economy, we see that this is happening at the same time that this new policy paper about circular economy was released, which is more like a guideline for us to know what circular economy is, what the targets for a circular economy are, and also to identify what will be the different enablers at different industrial processes for us to actually embrace a circular economy. And I think this is actually quite vital, because just because this is policy, it doesn't mean that it will be easy to implement. So in these conversations and discussions, it's very, very important that we identify what will enable us to achieve these very ambitious targets. And finally, I just wanted to highlight this new document that DEFRA is doing consultation about, which is regarding waste prevention program from England. I think it's very important, particularly for foundation industries people, to participate in this consultation and for us to feed back to DEFRA in this document, highlighting the importance of waste prevention in foundation industries and the key role that this potential waste will have in enabling a circular economy for this sector. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Okay, cool. Okay, so in the interest of time, and we need to get to the breakout rooms, I just want to pick up something which there is a subtlety, and I want to just draw on the subtleties when we get to the breakout rooms. So on the top right, we've got a very nice roadmap that comes from the Confederation of the European Paper Industries, and you can see that the little logo, the little image on the bottom right of that shows some trees. The UK paper industry is not really reliant on a UK forest products industry. It's rather a separate piece in the whole. There are a few companies where this is integrated. So I think these kind of subtleties that change from location to location are something we need to understand in our interpretation of roadmaps. And when we come to the discussions, if there's things that you're aware of that are very much UK focused or subsector focused, so in case of the paper industry, what you do for specialty papers and many tissues, which is on the right, is rather different from what you do for brown paper. So these kind of subtleties, if we can pick these up in the discussion, those will be really, really useful. And we'll move to the next slide.
So in this presentation, one of the things we wanted to highlight to the community today is the different type of projects that could be developed within the framework of environmental responsibility or resource recovery or resource efficiency. So this is one of the projects that was funded by the Fast Start project of Innovate UK last year. So we are actually waiting to see some of the outcomes very soon, and we will make this available by the Network Plus website. What I wanted to highlight showing this particular case of study is the fact that this is a project sponsoring, creating a community, making everyone to sit in the same table to discuss about how they could collaborate, co-create, and identify different types of solutions or strategies that will enable them to achieve some very ambitious goals. So if we have a look here at the participants, it's a very large consortium, but we have from academia, we have environmental resource management, we have the Confederation of Paper, we have the construction sector, we have chemical sector, and so on. And they're actually tackling very ambitious goals and identifying this project. For example, how can we do precious metals recovery and how they can be done or benefit in many different industries at the same time. Plastic recovery, local energy and network, meeting the needs for energy. And what was really interesting when we did that and look at that case of study is that just, I think it was last week on Friday, the BBC just had a statement saying that 40 million pounds will be invested to create one of these industrial hubs. And finally, we have the case of study number 2, which is very It's a completely different style of project. So here we have just 3 companies, and it's very specific. It's to valorize something that is considered waste for an industry to create a product that will benefit other industry. Yeah. Next slide. Bill?
We don't need to talk through these specifically, but we'll go straight to the breakout session where those questions can be asked. And I just ask if you think a little bit about those location specific and subsector specific angles. That'll be really, really useful to try and capture some of that. So we'll move to the breakout sessions now. Thank you.
Yeah, you go ahead. So the next talk is going to be on thermal sensing mainly, and it's from John Wilmot, who's going to be introducing this topic, and I think John will be in the breakout sessions, and one of your colleagues as well, John, is that right?
Hopefully if Ian's here, he can.
Yeah, okay, so there should be some expertise within at least some of the sessions in this area. So please go ahead, John, and thank you for dropping it down a little.
Okay, yeah, I've cut out the start really, where I was just trying to sort of say that there are loads of things that we might want to measure in terms of physical properties of processes, and then there's sort of a measurement science underneath all of those, or many of them, and thermal or temperature seems to have a particular place, I think, within these industries, perhaps because people want to control furnaces at high temperature, and the idea that there's a sort of signal that we want to, that isn't always a faithful representation of the thing we want to measure. And so that was my preamble. I then want to show you some examples really of get you thinking about why we need to just consider what our instruments are telling us, which is the only way I think we'll get to a sort of digital manufacturing, if we have instrumentation that tells us things, and we need to sort of consider what it's telling us, because it's not always going to give us the result we want unless we do, or at least if somebody helps us with those measurements. And this slide's a good example really, with an isothermal block of aluminium that's just come out of a furnace, and yet it looks a radically different temperature across its surface, and we can sort of help ameliorate some of those problems by working at much shorter wavelengths than this long wave camera, and by considering emissivity. So that's the sort of route to a solution for that problem. Again, with the same block, this is just before it was pressed, just rotating it in air, its measured temperature changes dramatically, but its actual real temperature obviously doesn't, just because of hot objects in the background. So a camera is confused by this, and a radiation thermometer would be even more confused, and you wouldn't really understand why unless you were sort of thinking it through. So I was trying to think about sort of examples of why we should care about measurement uncertainty, because a lot of people perhaps don't. I was talking to a blast furnace sort of process manager last week, and they were saying that running their furnace too cold can lead to solidification problems that cost £1 million a day to resolve. And so the tendency is to sort of run them hotter than they need to be. Yet that can cause problems too. There are many problems, one of which is that silicon tends to end up in the iron and not in the slag, and that's quite expensive to resolve. I believe they add lots of aluminium powder later in the process, which is expensive and degrades the quality of the steel. So again, lots of money is lost in that. If you look at the uncertainties of a thermometer or camera, 3% might be not unreasonable, which doesn't sound like much, but 3% at 1650 degrees is 50 degrees C, which is probably too much really for this application. Petrochemicals is the classic example of why you want to have a good temperature measurement, because if you run 20 degrees colder than the optimum temperature, then you can lose a huge amount of product because the catalyst doesn't work as efficiently. But if you run that too hot, then you dramatically reduce the lifetime of the tubes that can cost a fortune to replace. And then large temperature excursions can lead to catastrophic explosions. So they're very careful with their temperature measurements. To give an example from brick, 1573 seems to be an important temperature. We find a lot of people suspend thermocouples in air to measure that temperature. Thermocouples are a bad method used like that because they radiate their own heat at a much faster timescale than is their response time, and so inherently they'll always read low with that technique, and also it's not really a very good proxy for the actual brick temperature. And again, there's an uncertainty issue here where a reasonable uncertainty for a thermometer, a non-contact thermometer, is quite a big uncertainty for this process. But I mean, things can be done to resolve that. From glass, an example here is, say that your molten glass inside your glass tank's 1000 degrees C. Say the walls are radiating at 1300 degrees C. That radiation from the background will inherently add into the signal. So, what effect will that have? And we can do some calculations. And I was going to say in my preamble that there are a range of different thermometers options, different parts of the infrared spectrum. Often we think about using as shorter wavelength as possible, but actually this is an example of where, because of the rate of change of these signals, actually the mid-wave infrared would be recommended for this application. Final example, cement, where we make a lot of measurements throughout the process, typically on the conveyor. We look at the shell for hotspots and problems, but probably the most important measurements, the burn zone, where we would be sort of interested in maintaining a furnace temperature to within defined limits, a bit like the petrochemical furnaces. In this case, free lime, unreacted lime, is a sort of key performance indicator, if you like, for the material. So the tendency is to run the furnace hotter than it needs to be. I was reading a study the other day that suggested if you go from not very much temperature measurement to good temperature measurement, you could save 100 megajoules per ton of clinker. So it's and I think the payback time on that investment be about 2 months. So yeah, again, good reasons to care about measurement uncertainty. So I think that was probably about 5 minutes. In the questions to consider in the breakout sessions, I was asked to provide 4 questions, and well, here they are. I won't use up time by reading them here. Is that okay, Ian?
I'm muted there. That was absolutely brilliant. Wow. Yeah, you do some of the coolest science on the faculty, in my view. So it's really good.
Thanks, Ian. So it's nice to be able to collaborate with lots of people as well, across lots of different disciplines.
Okay, so we have the questions that we can consider. And we move to the breakout session.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, thank you, everybody. Thank you for the participants who've come along and offered their opinions. We've had some excellent discussions in my breakout sessions. It's been quite hectic, keeping on top of the chat and the hands, the raised hands and the questions coming verbally. So thank you very much. What happens next? Okay, so we're going to collate what we've got. I wasn't in all the sessions. There's 4 sessions for each topic, so we've got probably quite a lot of data to bring together. It's going to take us a little while, but we are going to try and bring that together in some kind of overview. And the conversation needn't stop. Okay, so we're very happy to take emails and to continue discussion on this. We can have one-to-one meetings with companies who are interested in anything that's been presented. Bear in mind, there will be focused workshops going into greater granularity on these 3 themes and on other themes as we work through, and there will be calls for proposals in these 3 themes. And we will decide absolutely on the order based on the comments that we see from this. But that's going to be happening in the very near future. Do any of the management committee have any thing they would like to say specifically in the wrap-up session? Cam, do you want to comment? If you don't have to.
Yeah,
okay.
No, I'm happy to. I'd just like to say we had a really enjoyable conversation over the 3 different areas. I guess, I'll hold my hands up and say I was always a little bit concerned when we did the review of this roadmap that we might come back with something that nobody agreed with, but I was quite happy to see over the course of the discussions that we had. And I think particularly in the area of the industrial symbiosis and resource efficiency, there really were some strong synergies that came through across the different sectors, at least within the group where I was discussing things. I think in the digitalization space as well, I think John's talk promoted some quite interesting broader discussions as well around the fidelity of data in general, and whether or not we should be using sort of standards and where we can identify best practice, and the role that the Network Plus potentially should be playing in trying to communicate that, because we identified not just between sectors but even within sectors there's a sort of a vast array of different levels of maturity with regards to using data in the control or design of processes. So I thought that was really interesting. And again, just wanted to say thanks very much to everybody for contributing. I really enjoyed it. I appreciate it's one workshop amongst many, but just to reiterate Ian's point, it's really important input for us. It will directly influence the decisions that we make with regards to the scope of the funding call, and we really want to try and direct this where these funds where they're going to make the biggest impact. And the input that you have all put forward today, I think, is really going to be helpful and beneficial to us in terms of making sure that we do that, so that there are cold, tangible outputs and impacts of the information that's being relayed today that's going to be really valuable for the network and hopefully the community as well.
Thanks, Cam. Does William, do you have any comments above and beyond that which has been said?
No,
was a good answer.
Yeah, okay. No, it was Cam caught it all. I think we had similarly really good conversations, and just to say I found it personally very, very interesting and illuminating. So thank you all very much for the contributions, and also thanks to the team who've been capturing notes, etc. They've done a great job.
Yeah, they've done a great job. Susan, any comments above and beyond?
No, just echoing what everyone has said. Thank you very much, everyone, for your time, for your active participation with the whiteboard, putting comments in the chat. We also had some very interesting conversations. And one of the things that resonated the most was perhaps the use of language that sometimes we use across foundation industries to share the message, especially with the small companies and people that is not part of different organizations, for them to also benefit from these different opportunities. So I think it's something that we will bear in mind as well and feedback, because I think it's very important to try to be as inclusive as we possibly can and benefit broader society. And another thing that came up, which will be worthwhile, is if there will be opportunity for the network to create some sort of like non-disclosure agreement for some of the companies that will be willing to share some of their technologies and some of the things that they have been doing, so we can, with this information kept private, help them to connect with other people to develop some mini projects. So this is something that we also are going to look at after the workshop.
Yeah, just to comment on that, Susan. So the companies that contact me, I'll have a general discussion with them about something, and then when we move towards more specific technical discussion, I will always put an NDA in place. So I suggest we adopt that policy so that we're all covered for background and information. That's a really good way. So that way we can communicate, and you can rest assured that we are, legally obliged not to give away any information whatsoever, to pain of imprisonment. I just made one comment, and this is a bit naff, this comment, but we're the Network Plus, okay? And you are the industry people, you're out there, you're working in the various sectors. If we collaborate well as the Network Plus organization and its wider academic grouping, and you feed us the information and you work with us, the final Network Plus concept can become a very strong, clear roadmap for moving forward towards net zero 2050, because we'll have mini projects dealing with feasibility studies. We'll have workshops on specific topics. The level of granularity we can achieve to do this over 3 years is really quite good. You know, we will get down to the nitty-gritty aspects of different technologies, comparing and contrasting them. We can perform techno-economic analyses to compare and contrast different technologies as a mini project, if you put that mini project in with an academic collaborator. The Network Plus can become a roadmap within itself for the future. And that's really the message I want to get to people, that if we work together, combine our resources in academia and within the industries that are part of the foundation cluster, then we can over the next few years put together a very detailed and examined roadmap, if you like. We can do the feasibility studies to see if that concept that's in the roadmap in your sector is actually one that could be valid. So that's really what we want to try and do. There are some announcements coming up. We have a funding call that will appear in your in-trays, in your emails, and in your Twitter accounts in the fullness of time, your LinkedIn accounts. I will advertise that my very good friend Clive Randall is going to be giving a talk in our Blue Skies Green Future webinar series. Clive Randall is the the director of the Materials Research Institute at the University of, Pennsylvania State University. And he's going to be talking about cold sintering, a technology that applies to glasses, ceramics, and even some metals. As long as you're dealing with powders as a starting base, you can do some things. And that technology works at incredibly low temperatures, potentially highly disruptive. And it's something that you need to have a think about if you're working in some kind of powder-based industry. We will have follow-on stuff on this on our social media platforms. And please contact the TFI Network Plus team if you need anything. If you want to continue the conversation, that would be great. We'd love to hear from you. It can be fed through the TFI Network Plus and then filtered out to the appropriate person. And then we can even filter it down to our Scientific Advisory Committee, who we've not really mentioned today. John Wilmot kindly gave a talk today, and he's part of our Scientific Advisory Committee, covering us because we don't know in the management committee that much about digitalization. So thank you for that, John. I'm going to conclude the talk. There's a couple of chats just in case there's anything here. No, it's just my team trying to get you to register. Please register. That is the important thing, because by registering, you can gain access to our repositories about the existing roadmaps. We're going to put a skills repository up there so you can access where skills resources can be done. Yeah, you'll be able to apply for your mini projects and so forth if you're part of the Network Plus membership. So thank you, everybody. And unless there's any further comments from colleagues, I'm going to conclude the workshop and thank everybody concerned. I feel like it's a bit like the Oscars. I'm going to bow out gracefully and say goodbye. Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody.